Boots. Terrence Boyd didn't hear the sergeant's first sentence. He heard the second one, and it stopped his coffee cup an inch from his mouth. Boots. And nobody even asked for a second toxicology screen. Case closed itself, practically wrapped it in a bow. Laughter. Not loud. Boots. The kind two men share when they've told a story so many times it stopped being a memory and became a bit. Boots. By Friday, 2 badges would be sitting on an internal affairs desk, and a file marked closed for 11 months would be reopened for the first time since the ink dried on it. Boots. But at 8:52 on a gray Tuesday morning, sitting at the counter of Amber Root Coffee on Cherry Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Terrence didn't know any of that yet. Boots. All he knew was that 2 uniformed Tulsa PD officers were standing 4 feet behind him, waiting on their order, laughing about something they were certain no one in the room could understand. Boots. He kept his eyes on the window. A delivery truck idled at the curb. A man in a windbreaker walked a leashed greyhound past the glass. Boots. Terrence looked exactly like what he was dressed to look like. A tired, unshaven freight broker named Derek Combs, killing time before a 9:14 meeting that, on paper, didn't exist. Boots. 11 months of undercover work had taught him how to disappear inside a room without once looking away from it. Boots. She never even pushed back on it, the taller officer said. His name tag read SGT-R Draven. Family didn't have money for a lawyer. Boots. What were they going to do, pay somebody to argue with the coroner's report? The second officer, younger, buzzed hair, a coffee in each hand, laughed the specific laugh of a man who has repeated a story so often it stopped being real to him. Boots. I still think about the sister showing up at the front desk asking for the body cam footage. And we told her what? Boots. Equipment malfunction. Convenient, right? Terrence's hand did not move. His face did not move. But something behind his ribs clicked into place with the cold, mechanical certainty of a round chambering. Boots. The sister. The body cam. Equipment malfunction. He knew those words. He'd read them 5 months ago, inside a civilian complaint that had crossed his desk by accident, and had no business staying in his memory as long as it had. Boots. Andre Whitfield, 27, dead 11 months, ruled a suicide. A sister named Renee had filed the complaint, officers refusing to preserve the scene, refusing to produce footage, closing the file before she'd finished giving her statement. Boots. He'd filed it under strange and moved on. It wasn't his case, not his division. Not his problem, it was his problem now. Boots. Terrence set the coffee down without a sound. He didn't turn his head. He didn't need to. The window gave him everything in reflection. 2 officers in full uniform, relaxed in the specific way that only comes from years of never once being asked to explain themselves. Boots. They don't know I'm listening, he thought. They don't know anyone has ever been listening. That's the whole design of it. Boots. He thought about standing. He thought about turning around, credentials raised, and asking Sergeant Draven to repeat himself for the record. Boots. The thought lasted exactly as long as it took him to remember the black Silverado that was supposed to pull into the lot outside this window in 22 minutes, carrying a man named Victor Salerno, who had spent 11 months believing Derek Combs was nothing more than a freight broker, with a gambling debt and a loose relationship with the law. Boots. Salerno was the last name on a distribution case that had cost the Bureau 2 years, 4 informants, and 1 agent's marriage to build. Boots. If Terrence so much as flinched wrong, Salerno's people would know within the hour. 11 months gone in a blink. Boots. Worse, 2 informants were still breathing inside that organization, exposed the instant anyone started asking why the quiet man at the counter turned out to be federal. Boots. He could not react, he could not leave. He could not so much as glance over his shoulder, without risking everything he had spent nearly a year building brick by brick, lie by careful lie. Boots. All he could do was sit very, very still and listen. You ever hear anything back on the file review? Boots, the younger one, Officer T. Meeks, his tag read, asked, voice dropping. Not from caution, from habit. The reflex of men who have talked about the job in public for so long the job has never once bitten them for it. Boots. Nah, Draven said. Why would I? It's closed. Been closed 11 months. Nobody's opening that again. Terrence lifted his coffee back up. Boots. His hand was perfectly steady. He made himself take a slow sip and watch the street the way a bored man watches a street, while a single sentence looped behind his eyes like a confession he had no legal way to use. Boots. It's closed. Nobody's opening that again. Through the glass, a black Silverado turned the corner and began to slow in front of the coffee shop, 4 minutes early. Boots. Terrence didn't move. Boots. But for the first time in 11 months, he understood exactly what it felt like to be trapped between two rooms at once. One where a man he'd spent a year hunting was about to walk through a door, and another, invisible to everyone standing in it, where a case buried 11 months deep had just quietly clawed its way back to life 4 feet behind him. Boots. He had no idea yet which room was going to be harder to survive. The Silverado idled at the curb for 3 full minutes before pulling away without Victor Salerno ever getting out. Boots. A scheduling change, texted a minute later, from a burner number Terrence recognized. Draven and Meeks left before that, unhurried, coffees in hand, already laughing about something else. A fantasy football trade, a captain's decipherment dinner. As if the last 5 minutes of their lives had never happened at all. Boots. That was the part. Terrence couldn't stop turning over on the drive back to the federal building on South Denver Avenue. Boots. Not the confession, the ease of it. They forgot they'd said it the second they said it. He didn't file anything that afternoon. Boots. He told himself it was because the Salerno case needed him sharp for 6 more weeks, needed nothing to go sideways. Boots. That part was true. It was also not the whole truth, and he knew it by the second night, when he opened his laptop at 11:40 and typed Whitfield, Andre into a database he had no active reason to be searching. Boots. Before he did, he made himself sit with the cost. 11 months of Salerno trusting the wrong face, 2 informants still inside, still breathing, because nobody had reason to look at them twice. Boots. His own name, clean, for now, attached to a case his section chief had already started mentioning in the same sentence as a promotion board. Boots. None of that would survive him being wrong. Worse, none of it would survive him being right, in a way nobody in this building wanted proven. Boots. He typed the name anyway. Terrence Boyd had not grown up wanting to disappear inside rooms. He had grown up in a 2-bedroom duplex on the east side of Detroit, the only child of Everett Boyd, a patrol officer with 19 years on the job and a reputation, in certain corners of the precinct, for asking questions that made other men uncomfortable. Boots. Everett had reported his own partner in 2003 for planting a baggie in a stopped car during a routine traffic check. Boots. The partner kept his badge. Everett got reassigned to a desk, then to a school crossing beat, then quietly, over 18 months, out of the department entirely, on paper for budget restructuring. Boots. He never once in the 11 years he had left told his son it was a mistake to have reported it. Boots. Terrence had been 12 when his father came home that last night on patrol and set his badge on the kitchen table instead of clipping it back to his belt, the way he always had. Boots. He remembered the specific sound it made against the laminate, a flat, final click, like something being put down for good. Boots. His father had looked at him and said only, "Doing the right thing doesn't come with a guarantee, Terry. It just comes with a choice." Boots. Everett Boyd died of a heart attack 9 years later, 48 years old, working private security at a mall 2 hours from the precinct that used to be his life. Boots. Terrence carried an index card in his wallet, folded into quarters so many times the crease had gone soft as fabric. Boots. On it, in his father's handwriting, was a badge number, 2214, and nothing else, his father's own badge number, the one he'd carried the day he chose to report what he saw. Boots. Terrence had taken it from his father's desk after the funeral, and it had lived in every wallet he'd owned since, through Quantico, through 6 field offices, through 11 months of being a man named Derek Combs, who gambled too much and cared too little. Boots. He had joined the Bureau believing that if the badge was going to mean anything, it had to mean something even when it was inconvenient, especially then. Boots. He had learned, slowly, that meaning it quietly and meaning it out loud were 2 very different survival strategies, and that most of the men and women who wore a badge chose the quiet version because the loud version had a cost history, didn't always forgive. Boots. That was why, on the second night, at 11:40 p.m., with a card in his wallet that had outlived his father by 9 years, Terrence typed a dead stranger's name into a database and told himself it was research. Boots. It was not research, it was a debt coming due. Boots. The complaint was exactly where he remembered it, pulled up through the Prairie Shield Regional Intelligence Portal, the shared Red Access database that every federal, state, and local agency in the metro fed into and drew from, officially meant for cross-jurisdiction pattern analysis. Unofficially the closest thing to a backdoor into 100 departments' files that still counted as authorized use. Boots. Filed by Renee Whitfield 11 months and 4 days ago. 2 paragraphs, flagged. Closed within 19 days by an internal review citing insufficient corroborating evidence. Boots. No follow-up interview on record. No body cam footage attached. A field marked unavailable. Equipment malfunction. The exact phrase Draven had laughed about over coffee. Boots. Terrence pulled the original incident report next. Responding officers, Sergeant R. Dre, badge 3391, and Officer T. Meeks, badge 4187. Boots. Cause of death, self-inflicted. The reviewing supervisor who had signed off on both the death investigation and the later complaint dismissal was a name he didn't recognize. A captain 2 ranks up, named Owen Castillo. Boots. He almost stopped there. It would have been easy to stop there. One bad case, one grieving family failed by an overworked system. Boots. Tragic, but not exactly a federal matter. He told himself that for the 4 minutes it took to run Draven's badge number through the portal's cross-jurisdiction case index, a search any agency with Fusion Center access could legitimately run, logged under his own credentials, impossible to later pretend he hadn't made. Boots. 2 more names came back. Selena Marquez, 34, fall from a 3rd-floor apartment on East Pine Street, ruled accidental, closed in 17 days. Boots. A neighbor's statement, never followed up on, mentioned that Selena had called her sister, that same morning, to say a man had been sitting in a parked car outside her building for 2 straight days. Boots. Corey Nash, 29, single-vehicle collision on the Gilcrease Expressway, no witnesses, ruled unrelated to any prior police contact, despite 2 domestic disturbance calls to the same address in the 6 months before his death. Boots. Closed in 12 days. Same reviewing captain on both. Same phrase, insufficient corroborating evidence, appearing in both dismissed complaints, word for word, like something copied out of a template nobody thought anyone would ever read twice. Boots. And the same field in every single file, filled in the exact same way. Bodycam footage unavailable, equipment malfunction. Boots. 3 incidents, 3 cameras, 3 separate technical failures. Not one supervisor above Draven had apparently thought that was worth asking about a second time. Boots. Terrence sat back from the screen. His apartment had gone quiet in the specific way a room gets quiet when a person realizes they are no longer looking at one bad night. Boots. 3 names were not a coincidence anymore. 3 names were a pattern with a signature on it. He waited until Friday to bring it to his supervisor, Assist Special Agent in Charge Carla Reinhold, mostly because Friday was the one day she didn't have back-to-back briefings stacked to the ceiling. Boots. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. The coffee shop, the database, the 3 names, arms crossed, expression giving away nothing until he finished. Boots. You were where exactly when you overheard this? A coffee shop on Cherry. I was staging for the Salerno handoff. Boots. So you were in an active undercover posture, off the clock from anything to do with Tulsa PD misconduct, listening to 2 uniforms talk about a case that isn't your division, isn't your jurisdiction, and isn't officially anything but a closed file. Boots. She said it flatly, not unkindly, the way someone recites a problem back to make sure they've understood its shape correctly. Boots. Terrence, I believe you heard what you heard. That's not the issue. Then what is? The issue is you don't have a complaint. Boots. You have a memory of a conversation you can't legally use, cross-referenced against 3 files you pulled through Fusion Center access that's logged under your name, and tied to searches that have nothing to do with Salerno. The kind of activity that's going to raise exactly the sort of internal question neither of us wants attached to you 6 weeks before he goes to indictment. Boots. She exhaled, long and slow. If this were anyone else walking in here with this, I'd tell them to write it up as a tip and let it die in somebody's inbox for 6 months. Boots. But it's you. A small, tired concession, not quite a smile. I'll make one call, quietly, to someone who can pull the Whitfield file properly, through a door that doesn't have your fingerprints on it. Boots. That's what I can give you right now. It wasn't nothing. It also wasn't enough, and they both knew it. Boots. The call came back Monday morning, and it came back wrong. Reinhold found him at his desk, phone still warm in her hand. Boots. Draven's up for a commendation, she said. Departmental award, case closure rate, community outreach, the whole citation. Ceremonies in 3 weeks. Boots. Something settled low and cold in Terrence's chest. For what, exactly? For being efficient. She set the phone down on his desk like it had grown heavier in her hand. Boots. 17 days, 19 days, 12 days. Every file in his stack closes fast, clean, no loose threads. To anyone who isn't looking at all three side by side, it reads like a good cop with a strong clearance rate. Boots. She looked at him. You're the only person who's looked at them side by side. Terrence thought of Draven's voice through the window's reflection. Easy, unbothered, 4 feet from a man he'd never once considered a threat. Boots. It's closed. Nobody's opening that again. In 3 weeks, a room full of people who trusted a badge more than they'd ever thought to question one were going to stand up and applaud him for it. Boots. We need to find someone who was never asked to stay quiet the first time, Terrence said. Someone who already knows nobody's coming. Boots. Reinhold didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice had gone careful in a way he recognized, the sound of someone handing him something she couldn't take back. Boots. Andre Whitfield's sister still lives 20 minutes from here. She's called the department's tip line 4 times since the case closed. Boots. Nobody's called her back once. Renee Whitfield answered the door in scrubs, like she was either just off a shift or about to leave for one. Boots. She looked at Terrence's credentials for exactly as long as it took to read them, then at his face for a great deal longer than that. Boots. FBI, she said. Not a question. Took you long enough. I found out 4 days ago, Terrence said. I understand if that doesn't mean much. Boots. It doesn't. She didn't move from the doorway. Neither did the last 4 people who showed up here saying they wanted to help. Boots. He didn't argue with her. He waited. After a long moment, she stepped back and let the door swing open, which was as close to an invitation as he was going to get. Boots. The apartment was small, clean, and full of Andre, a photograph on a bookshelf of a young man laughing at something outside the frame, one arm slung around Renee's shoulders. Boots. A denim jacket still hung on a hook by the door that Terrence guessed correctly. Nobody had moved in 11 months. Boots. You want to know what happened? Renee said, sitting across from him at a kitchen table with a rooster-shaped napkin holder, the kind of joke gift a mother gives, that ends up meaning something else entirely once she's gone. Boots. Everybody wants to know what happened. Nobody's ever wanted to know what happened after. Tell me the after. She studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether that particular question had ever been asked of her sincerely before. Boots. They came to the door at 2 a.m., not to tell me, to ask me questions. Where was I that night? Boots. Did Andre have money problems? Did he seem depressed? Had I noticed anything, like I was the one who needed explaining? Boots. Her hand stayed flat on the table. I didn't get to see him. They said the scene was still being processed. Boots. By the time they let anyone in, it wasn't a scene anymore. It was just an apartment somebody had already cleaned. Boots. Who cleaned it, that's the thing. Her jaw tightened. Nobody would tell me. I asked 3 times. Got 3 different answers. Boots. A restoration company, a city contractor, standard protocol. None of them checked out when I called around. Terrence kept his voice even, though something in his chest had gone very still. Boots. Did you ask for the body cam footage? 4 times. She said it the way a person says a number they've carried so long it's worn smooth in the pocket. Boots. First they'd told her it would take time to process. She'd filed the request again. Then came the phrase Terrence already knew by heart. Boots. Equipment issue. That unit, that week. Delivered so casually the second time that she'd stopped believing any of it by the third. Boots. You know what's funny, she said. I used to think if I just asked the right way, used the right words, somebody would eventually just tell me the truth. Boots. I don't think that anymore. I'm not going to promise you I'm different, Terrence said. I don't think promises are worth much to me right now. Boots. I can tell you what I found. You can decide what that's worth. That got her attention in a way nothing else had. Not sympathy, not credentials. Boots. He told her about the Fusion Center records, about Selena Marquez and Corey Nash, about the identical dismissal language, the identical malfunction excuse, the same captain's signature moving through all 3 files like a hand on a rudder. Nobody had noticed was steering. Boots. Renee didn't speak for a while after he finished. When she did, her voice had changed. Not softer, exactly, but less braced. Boots. There were bruises, she said, on his knuckles. The report said self-inflicted, no signs of struggle. I saw him at the funeral home before it was too late to see anything. Boots. His knuckles were bruised. Nobody ever asked me about that. I brought it up twice, and both times somebody changed the subject so smoothly I almost didn't notice they'd done it. Boots. That should have been photographed, documented. It's not in the file I saw. No, Renee said quietly. It wouldn't be. Boots. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable so much as heavy. The specific quiet that settles after two people have finally told each other something true and don't quite know what to do with it yet. Boots. Terrence let it sit. He'd learned in 11 months of pretending to be a man who didn't care that filling silence too quickly was its own kind of disrespect. Boots. I'm not asking you to trust me, he said finally. I'm asking if there's anything you still have. Anything nobody thought to ask for the right way. Boots. Renee studied him the way a person studies a decision they've already half made and are only now admitting to themselves. Boots. Then she stood, crossed to a drawer beneath the rooster napkin holder, and pulled out a small external hard drive small enough to fit in a coat pocket. Boots. My neighbor across the hall has a doorbell camera, she said, faces the stairwell. Andre's door is at the end of that hall. Boots. Nobody ever asked her for anything because nobody ever knew to ask. She gave me a backup of that week before her subscription lapsed and the cloud footage aged out. Boots. She turned the drive over once in her hand, as if still deciding whether handing it over made her brave or just tired of being the only one who remembered. Boots. I never gave this to anyone, because the last 4 people who wanted to help walked in here and said almost exactly what you just said. Boots. She didn't hand it to him. Not yet. Her phone buzzed once on the table between them. She glanced down, and whatever she saw made her go still in a way that had nothing to do with Terrence. Boots. What? He asked. She turned the screen toward him without a word. A security alert from her neighbor's cloud storage account, forwarded automatically to Renee's own email months ago, and apparently still active. Boots. A sign-in attempt had been blocked from an unrecognized device. Timestamp, 11 minutes ago. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Boots. Renee looked at the drive in her palm, then back at the door, recalculating in real time how thin the walls of the apartment actually were. Boots. Nobody's supposed to know that account exists, she said quietly. I never told the department it did. She looked at him, then at the door, then at the drive. Boots. Convince me you're not the 5th. Boots. Renee handed him the drive 4 minutes after the alert. Not because his answer had convinced her. He hadn't given one yet. But because she'd looked at the blocked sign-in a second time and decided that whatever she believed about Terrence mattered less than getting the footage somewhere the department couldn't reach it first. Boots. Copy it tonight, she said, already reaching for her coat. Copy it twice. By midnight, Terrence had done both. One backup on a bureau-issued drive, logged into evidence under a case number that didn't exist yet. Boots. One on a personal drive he kept nowhere near his apartment. He didn't watch the footage that night. He told himself it was because he needed a forensic tech to preserve the file properly before anyone touched the original data. Boots. That part was true. It was also easier than admitting he wanted one more night, where the worst of it was still just a possibility. Boots. He didn't get one. At 6:14 the next morning, Reinhold called before he'd finished his coffee. Somebody accessed the Fusion Center audit log for your Whitfield-adjacent searches, she said. No greeting, no preamble. Boots. Not you. Somebody looking at you looking. Who? Audit trail says a terminal inside the department, logged under a supervisor's credentials. Boots. I can't tell you which one yet. That has to go through channels, and channels take days we don't have. Boots. A pause, heavier than the silence before it. Terrence, whoever it is knows someone federal has been pulling those 3 names. Boots. They don't know it's you specifically, yet. Yet sat in the air between them like a held breath. The doorbell footage never made it to the lab clean. Boots. Terrence drove to Renee's neighbor's building himself, credentials in hand, prepared to formally request the original cloud files as corroboration for the copy already sitting in evidence. Boots. The neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Dorothy Lindqvist, met him at her door with the open, unguarded politeness of someone who hadn't yet learned to be afraid of a badge. Boots. Oh, that account, she said, pulling up the app on her phone. I've had nothing but trouble with it lately. Boots. She frowned, tapped the screen twice, harder than the touchscreen needed. That's strange. What is it? It says my subscription lapsed. Boots. Footage older than 72 hours is gone. She looked up at him, apologetic, as if she'd personally misplaced something of his. Boots. But I never let it lapse. I pay for the whole year. I just renewed it in March. Terrence kept his voice level, the same stillness that had gotten him through a coffee shop with two liars standing 4 feet behind him. Boots. Can you show me the billing history? She could. The subscription had been active straight through until 9 days ago, when it had been canceled and immediately reinstated under a new billing cycle, wiping every file recorded before that date from the company's retained storage. Boots. 9 days ago was 20 days after Andre Whitfield's death, long enough that a grieving family wouldn't think to check. Boots. Recent enough that it couldn't be coincidence. Somebody canceled and restarted my subscription, Dorothy said slowly, understanding arriving in real time. Boots. Who can even do that? I never gave anyone my login. Terrence already knew the shape of the answer, even without a name attached to it. Boots. Someone had found a way to make the footage disappear quietly and cleanly, timed to a window nobody official would have thought to check. Boots. Someone who'd had 11 months to think about a doorbell camera no one had ever bothered to ask about, until apparently, very recently. Boots. They know Renee kept something, he thought. They just don't know she already gave it away. That was the only thing standing between the truth and total erasure, a 48-hour margin, and a copy sitting in a drawer at a field office instead of in a cloud account somebody else controlled. Boots. He called Renee from the car. The subscription had been tampered with. The original cloud files were gone. It didn't matter, they already had the copy. Boots. Silence on the line longer than it should have taken to process good news. They went after it, Renee finally said. Boots. Before you'd even convinced me to give it to you. Which means they already knew I had it before I decided to trust you. Boots. Her voice had gone quiet in a way that wasn't relief, which means somebody's known about that camera longer than 4 days, Agent Boyd. Boots. Somebody's been watching this a lot closer than a routine review. Terrence didn't have an answer for that, because she was right, and there wasn't a version of the truth that would make it less unsettling. Boots. He ended the call telling her to change her locks and vary her routine for a few days, advice that sounded thin even as he said it. Boots. The message arrived at 9:52 that night, while Terrence sat parked outside his own apartment, engine off, trying to decide how much of this belonged in a written report and how much would only paint a target on people who'd never asked for one. Boots. The number wasn't saved. Not local. 3 words, no punctuation, no signature. Leave it closed. Terrence sat with the phone lit in his hand for a long time, the cursor of his mind running the same 3 possibilities on a loop. Boots. A bluff from someone rattled by an audit log. A message from someone who had no idea how little he'd actually documented yet. Boots. Or the possibility that sat coldest. Proof that whoever had access to that fusion center trail already knew exactly who they were warning and exactly where he lived to send it. Boots. He didn't reply. He photographed the screen, logged the number, and forwarded both to Reinhold with a single line. Somebody already knows. Boots. Then he sat in the dark a while longer, thinking about bruised knuckles nobody had ever photographed, and a doorbell camera that had almost disappeared 9 days too late to matter, and wondering how many other names, closed just as quietly, had never had anyone left behind stubborn enough to keep a backup. Boots. 3 weeks after that text, on a Thursday morning, the forensic lab called it in. The technician, a meticulous woman named Naomi Osei, had spent 11 days doing nothing dramatic: timestamp verification, metadata extraction, chain of custody documentation, the unglamorous work that either holds up in front of a judge or doesn't. Boots. The doorbell file is clean, she told Terrence and Reinhold, sliding a printed report across the table instead of narrating it. Boots. Original capture, no editing artifacts. Timestamp consistent with the manufacturer's server logs from that week, logs the company still had, since Dorothy's copy predates whatever happened to the original account. Boots. She tapped the page. It shows Sergeant Draven and Officer Meeks entering the building at 11:47 p. m. 40 minutes before the official incident report says they arrived. Boots. Reinhold read the summary twice. 40 minutes. Nobody can explain, Naomi said. On a night the responding officers already told a grieving family nothing was recoverable. Boots. That was the first thing that stopped being deniable. Not a confession overheard through a coffee shop window. A file with a manufacturer's signature on it, sitting in evidence, saying something no closed report could quietly outlast. Boots. The internal audit took longer than anyone wanted. Not hours, 9 days, moving through IT security and then through a command staff briefing Terrence wasn't in the room for, because it wasn't his case to run, only his case to have started. Boots. When the name finally came back, it wasn't Draven, it was Captain Owen Castillo, the reviewing supervisor whose signature had sat quietly under 3 closed files for years. The same man who had flagged the Fusion Center audit log the moment someone unfamiliar started asking questions he'd stopped expecting anyone to ask. Boots. Under his own authorization, Castillo had personally called the Doorbell Company's regional office 9 days after Andre Whitfield's death, using a fabricated case reference to request account changes he had no legal authority to request. Boots. It was the kind of detail that, once found, could never again be explained away as an oversight. What happened next didn't happen quietly, and it didn't happen the way anyone in that building expected. Boots. Castillo was placed on administrative leave the following Monday, pending an internal affairs investigation, and within 11 days, a federal grand jury had returned an indictment naming him on charges of obstruction of justice and witness tampering, tied directly to the message sent to Terrence's phone and the falsified request that erased Dorothy Lindqvist's footage. Boots. He was arraigned in a federal courtroom on a Wednesday morning, in civilian clothes, flanked by an attorney who spent most of the hearing trying to keep him from speaking. Boots. Castillo did not stay quiet. Outside the courthouse, cameras rolling, he told a reporter that everything he'd done had been to protect good officers from a system that punished efficiency, that he had never once believed he was covering up a murder, only smoothing over paperwork that didn't need to become a circus. Boots. He said it with his chin up. He said it like a man who still believed it. Draven and Meeks were arrested the same week, charged with falsifying official records and civil rights violations tied to all 3 closed cases: Whitfield, Marquez, and Nash. Boots. Draven's attorney initially argued the body cam failures were coincidental, unfortunate, unrelated to any pattern. Boots. That argument collapsed in a pre-trial hearing, when Naomi Osi's report was entered into the record alongside 2 additional device logs the Bureau's cyber unit had recovered, logs showing the same make and model of body camera on 3 separate nights, 3 separate years, disabled through the exact same override sequence, entered by the exact same badge credential. Boots. There was a moment during that hearing that Terrence would carry with him longer than almost anything else from those months. The moment Draven, sitting at the defense table in a borrowed suit instead of a uniform, heard the override sequence read aloud into the record and understood, visibly, in front of a courtroom that included Renee Whitfield sitting 4 rows back with her hands folded so tightly in her lap the knuckles had gone pale, that there was no version of efficient left to hide behind. Boots. He didn't say anything. He put his head down. It wasn't an apology. It was the first time in 11 months anyone had watched him look like he understood exactly what he'd done, instead of what he'd gotten away with. Boots. No press conference marked the arrests. No perp walk, no statement read from a podium. Just paperwork moving through the specific unglamorous channels that actual accountability moves through. Slower than anyone wanted, and real in a way nothing rushed ever quite manages to be. Boots. 3 days before it was scheduled, the department quietly pulled Draven's commendation from the ceremony program. No public statement. Reinhold heard about it secondhand, from someone who'd noticed his name missing from a printed list and asked why. Boots. Terrence met Renee one more time at the same kitchen table, with the rooster's napkin holder, 3 weeks after the last time he'd sat there believing far less than he did now. Boots. They indicted Castillo, he told her. Draven and Meeks are looking at federal charges. Andre's case is part of all of it. Boots. So are the other 2. She didn't smile, not exactly. She looked instead like someone setting down something heavy she hadn't realized she was still carrying. Boots. You believe me now? I believed you the day you opened the door. That's not the same as everyone else believing me. Boots. It's not, Terrence agreed, but it's the part that's actually true, regardless of what anyone else decides. The rest is catching up. Boots. He paused. 4 people came before me, Renee said. Not one of them came back with anything you did. She looked at the drawer under the napkin holder, empty now. Boots. I don't know if that makes you different or just lucky. Maybe both, Terrence said. I'd rather be lucky and right than confident and wrong. Boots. She almost laughed at that. A small, surprised sound, the first one he'd heard from her since he'd walked through her door. Boots. It didn't erase 11 months. It wasn't supposed to. The Salerno case closed the following month, on schedule, with an indictment that had nothing to do with any of this and everything to do with the 11 months Terrence had spent being someone else. Boots. He testified in civilian clothes, no longer needing to disappear into a room. It was a small thing, sitting in a witness chair instead of a coffee shop booth, being exactly who he was instead of who the job required. Boots. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like being allowed to exhale for the first time in almost a year. Boots. He drove past Amber Root Coffee 4 months later, on some impulse he didn't examine too closely, and found himself parking instead of passing. Boots. He went in, ordered a coffee, and sat at the same seat at the counter where a year of careful invisibility had ended. The moment 2 men forgot the room had ears. Boots. The barista who'd been working that first morning was still there. She didn't recognize him. No reason she should have. Boots. He hadn't been anyone worth remembering then. That had been the entire point. He sat with his coffee and didn't have to disappear into anything. Boots. Nobody behind him was talking about something they thought no one would ever hear. The room was just a room. Boots. That, more than the indictments, more than anything else that had happened since, felt like the actual ending. Andre Whitfield never got his life back. Boots. No investigation, however thorough, however overdue, could return to Renee the 4 years of birthdays her brother would have had, or undo the 2A. Boots. Knock that had treated a grieving sister like a suspect, instead of a person who had just lost someone she loved. Boots. What the investigation gave her instead was smaller, and in its way no less necessary. A record that finally matched what she'd known from the beginning. Boots. A file that could no longer be closed by someone hoping nobody would ever look twice. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive as a single moment. Boots. Sometimes it arrives the way this one did. Quietly, procedurally, 3 weeks and 11 days, and 1 stubborn doorbell camera at a time, built by people willing to keep listening long after everyone else had decided the conversation was over. Boots. If you'd overheard what Terrence did that morning, would you have stayed still or given yourself away? If this story stayed with you, that's reason enough to pass it on to someone who needs to be reminded that quiet does not mean forgotten. Boots. Tell me in the comments, would you have spoken up